Courtroom 3B was so quiet you could hear a pen drop. The air was thick with tension, and at the center of it all sat a mother-in-law, with a smug smile, clutching a document she believed would leave her son's wife with absolutely nothing. She thought the forged signature was her winning ticket. Instead, it was the exact mistake that would cost her everything. The heavy mahogany doors of Department 47 closed with a definitive thud, sealing the humid July afternoon outside. Inside, the courtroom of the Honorable Judge Reginald Brooks hummed with a steady drone of air conditioning. Chloe Alden sat rigidly at the petitioner's table, her manicured fingers tightly interlaced on the polished wood. After 7 grueling years of marriage and 14 months of a scorched-earth divorce, she just wanted out. Across the aisle sat her estranged husband, Thomas Alden. He looked impeccable, as always, in a bespoke navy suit worth more than most people's cars. But it wasn't Thomas who drew Chloe's anxious gaze. It was the woman seated in the front row of the gallery directly behind him, Margaret Alden, Thomas's mother. Margaret was carved from cold, generational arrogance. She possessed the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself, wrapped in cashmere and an endless disapproving sneer. From the day Chloe, a self-made daughter of a public school teacher, married into the Alden real estate dynasty, Margaret had made her disdain crystal clear. To Margaret, Chloe was an interloper, a gold digger who had sunk her claws into the Alden empire. The irony was staggering. When Thomas and Chloe first married, the Alden family business had been secretly hemorrhaging money, buried under toxic commercial real estate loans in downtown Chicago. It was Chloe's relentless work ethic, her sharp eye for logistics, and a massive inheritance from her late uncle that had bailed them out. She had turned a failing regional shipping firm into a national powerhouse. She had built the wealth they were now fighting over. Eleanor Hastings, Thomas's high-priced, notoriously ruthless defense attorney, rose to her feet, smoothing her skirt. At this time, the respondent would like to introduce a late discovery exhibit into evidence. We have already provided a copy to opposing counsel. Colo's attorney, Jonathan Critton, a seasoned litigator with a perpetual scowl, shot up instantly. Objection, Your Honor. Discovery closed 3 weeks ago. We are in the middle of final asset allocation. This is a classic ambush by paper. Judge Brooks peered over his reading glasses, his deep-set eyes narrowing. Ms. Hastings, you know better than to drop a bomb in my courtroom during the final hour. What is this exhibit? And why wasn't it produced during the previous 8 months of discovery? Your Honor, Hastings said smoothly, my client was completely unaware this document still existed. It was only discovered yesterday evening by his mother, Margaret Alden, while she was clearing out an old family vault at J.P. Morgan Private Bank. It has profound, undeniable implications for equitable distribution in this matter. Hastings handed a beige file folder to the bailiff, who passed it up to the bench. She then placed a duplicate in front of Jonathan. What is it? Chloe whispered, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. Jonathan opened the folder, and the color drained from his face. He stared at the pages for a long, agonizing moment before sliding them toward Chloe. It was a prenuptial agreement. Chloe stared at the bold legal header, Premarital Asset Protection and Waiver of Claim Agreement. The date at the top was October 12th, exactly 3 days before her wedding. Her eyes frantically scanned the text. The clauses were draconian. According to the document, in the event of a divorce, Chloe waived all rights to alimony, any claim to business assets developed during the marriage, and most devastatingly, agreed that her initial capital investment into Alden Reynolds Logistics was a non-refundable gift to the Alden family trust. It left her with nothing but the clothes on her back. She flipped to the final page. There, in black ink, was her signature, Kalo Reynolds. This is a lie, Chloe gasped, her voice slightly too loud for the quiet courtroom. I never signed this. I've never seen this document in my life. From the gallery behind Thomas, Margaret Alden let out a soft, dismissive scoff. Chloe spun around. Margaret met her eyes with a look of pure triumph, a terrifying smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "Your Honor," Jonathan barked, his voice rising in righteous anger. "This is a blatant forgery. My client has maintained from day one that there was no prenuptial agreement. To produce a document of this magnitude after the deadline is highly prejudicial and reeks of fraud." "Fraud?" Hastings shot back, spinning on her heel. "Your Honor, the document is fully executed, witnessed, and notarized. Miss Alden's signature is perfectly consistent with every other legal document in this case. The fact that she conveniently forgot signing a document that protects my client's family legacy is not our problem. It was executed at First Republic Bank in Chicago, notarized by a licensed state official. We have a forensic handwriting expert ready to testify to its authenticity by tomorrow morning." Judge Brooks rubbed his temples, visibly irritated by the chaos erupting in his domain. He looked at the signature, then down at Chloe, whose hands were now trembling violently. "Ms. Hastings, the timing of this is incredibly suspicious," the judge noted sharply. "However, if there is a valid prenuptial agreement, it supersedes the current proceedings. Mr. Crichton, I am going to provisionally admit the document as Exhibit 414, but I am halting proceedings for a 2-hour recess. You have until 20 a.m. to review this with your client. If you wish to challenge its authenticity, you'd better come back with more than just an accusation of forgery." "Thank you, Your Honor." Hastings smiled, taking her seat. As the judge struck his gavel and left the bench, Thomas finally looked back at Chloe. He looked slightly pale, but offered no apology, quickly turning away to whisper to his mother. Margaret stood, smoothing her immaculate coat, and stared down at Chloe. "You really thought you could just walk away with half of what belongs to us," Margaret whispered coldly as she passed the petitioner's table. "You were always a terrible investment, Chloe." Chloe couldn't breathe. The walls of the courtroom felt as though they were closing in. Jonathan grabbed her elbow, his grip firm and anchoring. "Don't say a word to them. Grab the file. We're going to the conference room now." The sterile, windowless attorney conference room on the 4th floor smelled of old coffee and floor wax. Chloe paced like a caged animal, her mind racing back to the week of her wedding, October 12th, 7 years ago. "I didn't sign it, John. I swear to you I did not sign that paper," Chloe said, her voice shaking with terror and rage. "Thomas and I explicitly agreed not to do a prenup. He told me his mother pushed for one and he refused. This is Margaret. She manufactured this." Jonathan sat at the laminate table, peering at the final page through a small jeweler's loupe. "The signature is practically flawless, Chloe," he said grimly. "If Margaret hired a professional forger, they did a terrifyingly good job. The pressure points, the loops on the R and the Y, it matches your driver's license signature perfectly. But that's exactly what bothers me. It's almost too perfect. Perfect matches are often traced via a lightbox from a legitimate document, so we prove it's traced." "It's not that simple." Jonathan sighed, rubbing his eyes. "We only have a photocopy right now. Hastings will keep the original locked up until her expert testifies. By the time we get our own forensic analyst to prove it's a traced job, this trial will be derailed. Your assets will be frozen, and Margaret will bleed you dry in legal fees for the next 3 years." Chloe stopped pacing. She forced herself to breathe, to channel the ruthless, analytical mindset that had made Alden Reynolds' logistics a massive success. She walked over to the table and stared down at the document. "Let me see it," she demanded. She leaned over the pages, ignoring the devastating clauses and focusing entirely on the technical details. The date, October 12th. The notary's stamp in the bottom left corner. Arthur Penhaligon, Notary Public, State of Illinois, County of Cook. Commission expires May 14th. Chloe froze. A cold, sharp realization pierced through her panic. Arthur Penhaligon. The name echoed in her mind. "Do you know him?" Jonathan asked, leaning forward. "He wasn't a bank teller at First Republic," Chloe said slowly, her eyes widening as memories from 7 years ago slammed into her mind. He was a senior private wealth manager at J.P. Morgan, the downtown branch. "Okay," Jonathan said. "Hastings said the document was found in a J.P. Morgan vault that tracks. But why would a senior wealth manager be notarizing a standard prenuptial agreement?" Chloe looked up at Jonathan, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. The panic was gone, replaced by the lethal calm of a woman who had just realized she held the winning hand. "Because I didn't sign a prenup on October 12th, Chloe said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "But I did sign a document in front of Arthur Penhaligon that day. A very, very important document." "What did you sign? Do you remember when I told you that the Alden family was quietly drowning in debt right before Thomas and I got married?" Chloe asked, sitting down across from her lawyer. Margaret had over-leveraged the family's entire real estate portfolio. 2 of her commercial skyscrapers were facing foreclosure. If the market found out, the Alden legacy would have been wiped out. Thomas came to me begging for help. He was terrified of his mother finding out he couldn't fix it. Jonathan nodded slowly. "You used your inheritance to bail them out. You capitalized the new logistics firm." "That was only half of it," Chloe corrected. "I couldn't just hand over $20 million to Thomas. I'm a businesswoman. I set up a blind trust and offshore holding LLC called Cobalt Financial. Through J.P. Morgan, Cobalt Financial quietly purchased all of Margaret Alden's toxic debt from her creditors." Jonathan's jaw dropped. "You bought your mother-in-law's debt?" "All of it," Chloe confirmed, her eyes practically glowing with vindication. "I restructured the loan so the Alden family wouldn't go bankrupt, but to protect myself, I required a massive collateral agreement. If the Aldens ever defaulted, or if there was ever a hostile move against my assets, Cobalt Financial had the right to call in the debt immediately. The collateral for that loan was Margaret's entire estate, her homes, her trust funds, her remaining stock in the logistics company, everything. And Margaret didn't know. Margaret didn't know. Margaret thought an anonymous European hedge fund saved her." Chloe laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "Thomas knew, but he swore to never tell her because her ego couldn't handle the fact that the low-class girl saved her empire. On October 12th, 3 days before my wedding, I sat in Arthur Penhaligon's office at J.P. Morgan and signed the final 150-page debt restructuring agreement. Arthur notarized it." Jonathan looked down at the forged prenup on the table. They lifted the signature page from the J.P. Morgan loan documents. He breathed, piecing it together. "Margaret must have found the old debt agreement in the family vault. She saw your signature on a standalone page at the back. She didn't read the 150 pages of financial jargon, or she didn't care. She just ripped off the signature page, attached it to a fake prenup, and brought it to court." "Exactly," Chloe said, standing up. "She thought she was stealing my company. She didn't realize that the very page she used to forge this prenup is the page that proves I own her." Jonathan didn't waste a second. He pulled out his laptop and began frantically typing. "I'm drafting an emergency subpoena, deuces Tekken right now. J.P. Morgan's downtown office is 4 blocks away. I'm subpoenaing Arthur Penhaligon and the complete, untampered original file for Cobalt Financial's October 12th transaction." 2 hours later, Courtroom 3B was packed again. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Margaret Alden sat in the front row, radiating smug confidence, completely unaware of the storm descending upon her. "Are we ready to proceed?" Judge Brooks asked, taking the bench. "We are, Your Honor," Eleanor Hastings said proudly. "We call Margaret Alden to the stand to authenticate the discovery of the prenuptial agreement." Margaret strode to the witness stand with the elegance of a queen ascending a throne. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down, smoothing her skirt. Under Hastings' gentle direct examination, Margaret spun a beautiful, convincing lie claiming she had been organizing Thomas's old safe deposit box at J.P. Morgan when she stumbled upon the document, entirely by accident. "Thank you, Mrs. Alden." Hastings smiled. Your witness, Mr. Crichton. Jonathan stood. He didn't carry a notepad. He just walked slowly to the podium, letting the silence stretch until Margaret looked slightly irritated. Mrs. Alden, Jonathan began, his voice dangerously calm. You testified that you found this document in a J.P. Morgan vault. You are quite familiar with J.P. Morgan's wealth management division, aren't you? I am, Margaret said haughtily. My family has banked with them for 4 generations. Excellent. Let's talk about the financial state of your family 7 years ago, specifically during the week of October 12th, the date on this alleged prenup. Jonathan leaned on the podium. Isn't it true, Mrs. Alden, that your family was on the precipice of total bankruptcy due to failed commercial real estate investments? Objection, Hastings shouted, leaping to her feet. Relevance. The family's prior finances have nothing to do with the authenticity of this prenup. It goes directly to the origin of the document and the witness's motive, Your Honor. Jonathan countered smoothly. Overruled. You may answer, Mrs. Alden, Judge Brooks said, leaning forward, suddenly highly intrigued. Margaret's face flushed an angry crimson. We experienced a brief liquidity crisis. It was handled. We have always been perfectly secure. Handled, Jonathan echoed. Yes, handled by an entity known as Cobalt Financial, which purchased over $60 million of your toxic debt, saving you from foreclosure. Are you familiar with Cobalt Financial, Mrs. Alden? Margaret sneered. They are an institutional investor. What does this have to do with Chloe trying to steal my son's money? Before Jonathan could answer, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A man in a sharp gray suit carrying a heavy steel-latched leather briefcase with the J.P. Morgan logo embossed on the side walked in, accompanied by 2 armed security guards. Jonathan smiled a wolfish, terrifying grin. Because, Mrs. Alden, the records have just arrived to show exactly who owns Cobalt Financial, and more importantly, exactly what document was actually signed by my client on October 12th. Margaret's smug facade finally cracked. Judge Brooks peered over his reading glasses, his irritation melting into curiosity. Mr. Crichton, who is this? Your Honor, I would like to call Arthur Penhaligon to the stand, Jonathan announced, his voice ringing with authority. Eleanor Hastings scrambled to her feet, her composure fracturing. Objection. This witness is not on the approved list for this trial. This is an ambush. Counselor, you introduced a surprise exhibit exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes ago. Judge Brooks barked, his patience gone. You opened this door. I am allowing Mr. Crichton to walk right through it. Overruled. Mr. Penhaligon, please take the stand. Arthur Penhaligon, a stern-faced man with silver hair that screamed decades of institutional banking, walked past the petitioner's table, swore an oath, and took his seat, resting the heavy leather briefcase on his lap. Margaret Alden stared at him, her knuckles white as she gripped the wooden railing. Beside her, Thomas looked as though all the blood had been drained from his body. Mr. Penhaligon, Jonathan began, pacing slowly, could you please state your occupation for the record? I'm a senior managing director in the private wealth management division of J.P. Morgan Chase Chicago branch, Arthur replied, his voice a steady baritone. I am also a licensed notary public for the state of Illinois. Jonathan picked up the beige folder containing the forged prenuptial agreement and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to Arthur. Mr. Penhaligon, please examine the final page of this document, marked as Exhibit 414. Is that your notary's stamp and signature at the bottom? Arthur pulled a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket. He studied the document for a moment. Yes, the stamp and signature are mine. The notary log number listed is 84B. Hastings let out a small sigh of relief, but it was violently premature. Mr. Penhaligon, Jonathan continued, his eyes locked on Margaret, did you notarize a 5-page prenuptial agreement for Chloe Reynolds on October 12th? Absolutely not, Arthur said firmly. My division does not handle standard family law documents. We handle complex corporate finance and ultra-high net worth debt restructuring. Then what exactly did you notarize for my client under log number 84B on that date? Arthur clicked open the steel latches of his briefcase. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound book, his official State of Illinois notary ledger, and a massive 150-page bound contract printed on heavy watermarked bank paper. According to my official ledger, on October 12th, Lot number 84B corresponds to a commercial debt restructuring and collateral transfer agreement, Arthur testified, holding up the massive document. The parties involved were the Alden Family Trust as the debtor and Cobalt Financial LLC as the creditor. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Eleanor Hastings sank slowly into her chair, realizing the catastrophic error her client had just forced upon her. And who is the sole managing member and financial beneficiary of Cobalt Financial LLC? Jonathan asked. Coley Reynolds, Arthur stated clearly. She capitalized the LLC with $20 million via a Federal Reserve wire transfer from her personal inheritance. The agreement stipulated that Cobalt Financial would assume $60 million of toxic commercial real estate debt previously held by Margaret Alden. Jonathan turned to the judge. Your Honor, I direct the court's attention to the physical paper of Exhibit 414. Mr. Penhaligon, what type of paper does J.P. Morgan use for its final execution contracts? Arthur adjusted his glasses. We use 32-pound archival-grade cotton paper, embedded with a microscopic UV-reactive watermark of the bank's seal to prevent corporate espionage and fraud. I have a UV light right here, Jonathan said, pulling a small black light from his pocket. He clicked it on and shined it directly onto the final page of the alleged prenup. Instantly, a glowing, intricate J.P. Morgan Chase seal illuminated across the center of the page. Well, look at that, Jonathan said softly, the silence in the courtroom deafening. The signature page of this prenup is printed on J.P. Morgan's proprietary corporate paper. Furthermore, Your Honor, if you look at the bottom right corner of the signature page under the UV light, you can see where someone attempted to chemically bleach out the original page number. It faintly reads page 150 of 150. Judge Brooks leaned so far over his bench he practically hovered above the court reporter. His face was a mask of unadulterated fury. Mrs. Phelps. Alden, Jonathan said, turning his gaze to Margaret, who was now trembling visibly. It seems when you found your debtor's copy of the master loan agreement in your vault, you simply tore off the final signature page 150 and stapled it to a fabricated 5-page prenuptial agreement. You then presented this Frankenstein document to your attorney, committing forgery, perjury, and attempting to defraud this court. That's a lie! Margaret shrieked, standing up. Her cashmere coat slipped from her shoulders. She manipulated everything. She's trying to steal my family's legacy. Mrs. Alden, sit down and remain silent, or I will have you gagged and chained to that bench. Judge Brooks roared, his voice shaking the light fixtures. He turned his blistering glare to Thomas's lawyer. Miss Hastings, do you have anything to say for yourself? Eleanor Hastings stood, her face pale, her professional reputation hanging by a thread. Your Honor, as an officer of the court, I state for the record that I had absolutely no knowledge of this document's fraudulent nature. I was explicitly assured by Margaret and Thomas Alden of its authenticity. At this time, I am formally withdrawing Exhibit 414 from evidence and requesting an immediate withdrawal as counsel for the respondent. Thomas grabbed Hastings' arm. You can't leave. You work for me. Hastings ripped her arm away in disgust. I am done with you, Thomas. You just let your mother commit a felony in federal court. Counsel's motion to withdraw is granted, Judge Brooks snapped. He slammed his gavel down like a thunderclap. Furthermore, I am directing the bailiff to seize Exhibit 414 and place it into a secure evidence locker. I'm referring Margaret Alden to the District Attorney's Office for immediate criminal investigation into aggravated forgery, perjury, and attempting to defraud a judicial proceeding. 2 court officers immediately moved toward the gallery, standing directly behind Margaret. She looked wildly around the room, her empire of arrogance shattered. But Jonathan Critton wasn't finished. Your Honor, there is one final matter, he said, his voice returning to its calm, lethal cadence. He looked down at his notes. As Mr. Penhaligon testified, the actual document my client on October 12th was a collateral transfer agreement. I have a copy of that agreement right here. He held up the massive J.P. Morgan contract. Section 4. Paragraph B of this loan clearly states that the creditor Cobalt Financial retains the right to call in the entirety of the $60 million debt immediately, without grace period, should the debtor engage in any hostile action, fraudulent litigation, or attempted theft of assets against the creditor. Thomas gasped, his hands flying to his face. He finally realized the magnitude of the trap they had just sprung on themselves. By fabricating a prenuptial agreement to strip my client of her assets, Jonathan concluded smoothly, Margaret and Thomas Alden have triggered the hostile action clause. As of this exact moment, Cobalt Financial is calling the loan. The Alden family trust owes Chloe Reynolds $60 million payable immediately. Judge Brooks leaned back in his leather chair, a grim smile playing at the corners of his mouth. And if they cannot pay, Jonathan stated, looking directly at Thomas, then per the collateral agreement, Cobalt Financial seizes the collateral, which includes the Alden family estate, the remaining commercial skyscrapers, and Thomas's 50% equity share in Alden Reynolds Logistics. My client doesn't just want half the company anymore, Your Honor. She is taking all of it. Thomas turned to his mother, his eyes burning with tears of absolute defeat. You ruined us, he hissed. You couldn't just let her have her fair share. You had to have it all. Now we have nothing. Margaret sat frozen, her mouth open in a silent scream of disbelief, as the two bailiffs officially instructed her to remain in the courtroom pending the arrival of Chicago police detectives. Judge Brooks struck his gavel one final time. Given the extraordinary circumstances and the blatant criminal fraud perpetrated by the respondent's side, I am ruling fully in favor of the petitioner. All asset division will default to Ms. Reynolds' initial filings, pending the enforcement of the J.P. Morgan debt agreement. Court is adjourned. The courtroom slowly emptied, leaving only the wreckage of the Alden dynasty behind. Khalil walked out of Department 47 alongside Jonathan. The heavy mahogany doors closed behind them, blocking out the sound of Margaret's sudden hysterical sobbing. Chloe stepped out of the courthouse and into the warm July afternoon. The Chicago skyline stretched out before her, a skyline she now owned a significant piece of. She took a deep breath of the city air, adjusting her sunglasses. She had walked in as a woman fighting for her life. She walked out as an empire. What an absolutely legendary move. Chloe proved that when you try to bury a brilliant woman, she'll just buy the shovel and the ground you stand on. Margaret's arrogance literally cost her the entire family legacy. If you loved this insane real-life courtroom drama and the ultimate financial revenge, make sure to hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist.